I paid for my wife's family vacation, but my sister-in-law excluded me. At checkout, when she expected me to cover her bill, I made her pay. I never imagined feeling this depressed while lounging in an upscale Miami Beach resort. A family vacation that was supposed to be unforgettable has become a nightmare because of my sister-in-law, Chloe. I was accompanied by my wife, Sarah, her aging parents, and Chloe. Sarah and I have been married for 10 amazing years. I'm already at my wit's end because of Chloe's treatment of me just 2 days into this vacation. Over the past 10 years, Sarah and I have established a pleasant life together. We have both put in a lot of effort to get to the senior positions we currently hold at our respective firms. Our success is reflected in our lifestyle. To break up the routine of our hectic lives, we take at least 3 large vacations a year, in addition to a number of weekend excursions. We are able to travel widely since we decided not to have children. We've made it a point to take Sarah's parents along on one of our yearly vacations for the past 2 years. Her mother finds it difficult to travel with her father alone, as his health has been progressively deteriorating. The trip this summer was particularly meaningful because Sarah's father had mentioned that he had always wanted to go to Miami, where he and his wife had gone on their honeymoon almost 50 years prior. He spoke of it with a certain fervor that betrayed a dread that this might be his final opportunity to relive those treasured recollections. Given how expensive a week in Miami would be, I promptly turned down his offer to help with the costs. I wanted to do this for these individuals, since they have been treating me like their own kid for the past 10 years. I can easily afford such costs because of my financial circumstances, and it was well worth the money to witness their happiness upon returning to Miami. When Chloe asked to go with us, our journey took a very different turn. Chloe has always been in a hard spot financially, unlike Sarah and me. Her husband's salary hardly meets the necessities for her 3 school-age children. She would always remark that she hadn't been able to afford a real vacation since her honeymoon whenever we shared pictures from our trips. She came up to us directly this year about going to Miami. I consented, even though I knew I would be responsible for all of her costs. Family should support family, after all. Chloe's behavior seemed strange from the moment we arrived in Miami. Only a few hours after arriving at our beach resort, the first warning sign appeared. Chloe recommended that the family take a picture in front of the breathtaking ocean scenery. In order to get everyone in the photo, I grabbed my phone and prepared to set the timer. She stopped me at that point. "Oh, would you just snap the photo for us? Mom, Dad, Sarah, and I are the only 4 people we want." Her remarks were like a kick to the face. I said nothing, figuring they might have preferred a single picture of their original family. However, this was not an isolated incident. Chloe made it the central theme of our trip. She would find a way to keep me out of every restaurant, tourist attraction, and special occasion. She kept saying, "Oh, just the 4 of us," or "This one's just for family." I took over as the official photographer, spending all of my time behind the lens rather than creating memories with my wife and in-laws. Even worse, Chloe began sharing these pictures on social media, fabricating a story about this family vacation in which I didn't exist. My in-laws would encourage me to participate in the pictures, and Sarah would occasionally step in and stress that I was also family. But Chloe always managed to sway the situation until I was back behind the camera for their ideal family reunion. I seemed to be nothing more than a walking ATM and personal photographer. I was looking forward to unwinding in the immaculate pool with its stunning ocean view after a long day of trekking and touring. I was about to enter the water when Chloe intercepted me once again. "Will you be able to stay out a while? We want a girl's picture that only includes Mom, Sarah, and me." What began as a seemingly simple request ended up involving me standing by the pool for an hour while Chloe staged an ongoing photo session. The women posed first, followed by a picture of the siblings, and then another original family picture. Every time I attempted to join them, she would come up with a new combination that conveniently left me out. If my presence was such a hassle, I couldn't help but wonder why she had bothered to come on this vacation. The following day's boat ride incident was far more obvious. When we got to the tourist destination, they provided boat rides along the shore. Families with 4 people would love the boats, 2 rows of 2 seats apiece. However, we were 5. Chloe stepped right in with her idea before anybody else could offer a reasonable rotation scheme. She insisted that this arrangement would be perfect for family photos and arranged for Sarah's parents to sit together in one row while she took the seat next to Sarah in the second. In the subsequent boat, I found myself surrounded by strangers. They also purchased a memento of their boat ride with the family. Currently, Chloe's social media feed features the picture. My entire holiday experience was well captured in the souvenir photo from the boat excursion. Me, awkwardly crammed between strangers, while my wife and her family created wonderful memories without me. I couldn't help but observe that I was always the one who had to be left out of any situation, even though I was paying for this entire vacation. Chloe never once volunteered to trade places or take turns being the odd one out. It was the same for dinner at the fancy seafood restaurant. I had been looking forward to this reservation for weeks, particularly asking for a prime table with an unhindered view of the sunset at one of Miami's most upscale waterfront restaurants. When we got there, the hostess escorted us to a circular table for six, which was well situated to capture the golden hour light across the ocean. I had imagined Sarah and I sitting together, facing the view, sharing this beautiful time, while her parents were seated across from us. Since Chloe was a last-minute addition to our trip, she might have easily grabbed a seat on the side. Rather, Chloe sat beside Sarah before anyone could even pull out a chair, and her parents, of course, took the best seats. With my back to the sunset I had deliberately planned this dinner around, I was forced into the worst conceivable position, between Sarah's parents and the crowded server station. Chloe's true colors came out when Sarah attempted to defend me by proposing that we reorganize the seating. "Stop being so clingy," she yelled at her sister, reminding everyone that this was a family holiday. As the evening wore on, the dinner only grew worse. I made an effort to engage in the discussion, hoping to discover some points of agreement, but Chloe had other ideas. She would purposefully direct the conversation away from me and toward things like high school escapades, family inside jokes, and childhood recollections. Whenever I tried to participate, Chloe would constantly interrupt and reroute the conversation. Even when Sarah and her parents attempted to incorporate me by providing background or making connections between stories and current affairs, I felt like an outsider peering in at my own dinner table because of the unbreakable wall of shared history she built. I had stopped attempting to join in by the time dessert came. It was during our scheduled spa day that the final insult occurred. I had carefully set up private suites in the resort's opulent spa, one for Chloe alone, one for her parents, and one for Sarah and myself. I believed that the four of us could still enjoy the spa treatments together, until my father-in-law opted to stay back at the beach because he wasn't feeling well. Chloe, however, saw another chance to keep me out. She smiled and said they needed a girls' day at the spa, so I should keep her father company instead. She was once again forcing me to miss an event I had organized and paid for, using my father-in-law's illness as leverage to make me appear self-centered if I objected. The manipulation was clear. Despite not going as planned, the day ended up being better than I had anticipated. My father-in-law and I had one of our most sincere talks ever while we were sitting on the beach. We connected on a level we had never experienced before as he told stories about his life and shared insights from his years of experience. I wanted to vent the aggravation that had been building up over the trip by telling him how his younger daughter was treating me. However, I couldn't bring myself to burden him with family trouble when I watched him relish the ocean wind and share his recollections with such contentment. One night in our hotel room, I attempted to have a private conversation with Sarah about this. She admitted that my feelings were valid, but her explanation only made me more perplexed. She explained how their father's frequent military deployments had affected their childhood and implied that Chloe's actions might not have been deliberate. Chloe might be frantically attempting to relive those lost family times as their father's health deteriorates. They seldom ever took formal family holidays together. I started to doubt myself after hearing Sarah's explanation. Did I come across as too sensitive? I was paying for the vacation, so was it improper of me to expect to be included? I realized how much Chloe's actions had damaged my confidence, since I was even doubting my right to feel hurt. The influx of encouraging comments I received after posting about my difficulties online confirmed what I'd been feeling all along. People remarked that Chloe's exclusionary behavior was too regular to be coincidental and that her actions demonstrated deliberate intent rather than careless oversight. Their viewpoints made it clearer to me that this was about fundamental respect and acknowledgement as a family member, not about having the right to be included just because I paid. My wife attempted to use their early experiences to justify her sister's actions, but the truth was more straightforward. Whatever Chloe's reason, what she was doing wasn't acceptable. The persistent isolation and disrespect had gotten out of hand. By the last few days of our trip to Miami, my breaking point was finally reached. The morning before we left, in our hotel room, I sought some alone time with Sarah and confronted her about her passive attitude during the trip, but her response remained centered on maintaining harmony. Although she admitted to observing Chloe's actions, she maintained that confronting her sister would just cause drama and ruin what might be one of their father's final family vacations. Although what she said made sense, it felt like yet another betrayal. Once more, family unity was being prioritized at the expense of my feelings. Something changed inside me at that very instant. I nodded in agreement with Sarah's request to move on, but my mind was already working out a strategy. Chloe had joyfully savored the opulent lodging and facilities I was providing, yet she had spent the entire vacation treating me like an unwanted stranger. She seemed to have forgotten that I was paying for every meal, activity, and spa treatment she had indulged in during this entire trip. Maybe it was time to let her know exactly what it meant to pretend I wasn't a member of the family. I started my strategy on the last morning we were in Miami. Claiming that Chloe and I would follow later, I casually advised Sarah to take her parents to the airport ahead of us. Sarah quickly saw through my motives. "I understand what you're attempting to accomplish," she muttered. Her slight nod was all the acknowledgement I needed. "Sure, I said. "And now you can remain neutral, as you have been for the whole trip." Sarah appeared prepared to let karma run its course after observing her sister routinely exclude me from every family activity for a week. When they were gone, I brought my well-thought-out plan to the front desk. The hotel's billing method was advantageous to me. All extra fees accrued during the stay were paid at checkout, even though the room rates had been paid in advance. Assuming I would pay for everything, this included every room service order, spa treatment, and poolside cocktail Chloe had freely consumed. Citing tax purposes as justification, I asked the management to divide the bills by suite. The request was so routine that the manager didn't even bat an eye. I couldn't help but think about how Chloe had never considered the financial or emotional consequences of her actions. As I stood there watching the clerk process the separation, I knew that was about to change. I paid for my own accommodation and my in-laws' suite, and then waited for the big reveal. Sarah's father's mobility challenges and wheelchair arrangements required additional time, so she and her parents were already en route to the airport. Chloe and I were alone in the hotel lobby after that. Chloe's face went pale as she gazed at the itemized bill in her hands when the manager summoned her to settle her account. The sum was astounding, likely many months' worth of her typical spending. As reality struck, her uncertainty turned to panic. Her gaze shifted between the bill and my face. "You're not covering mine, then?" I remained calm. "I've already paid for my family. You can cover your own." Chloe fumbled with her credit card and gave it to the manager, her hand trembling slightly. My suspicions were confirmed by the declined transaction notification. She had been living far beyond her means for the entire week, confident that I would pay for it. Her credit limit wasn't even close to covering half of her charges, even when the manager swiped her card once more. She was now feeling the effects of all those girls-only spa days and fancy dinners, and this time, her assumed ATM wasn't saving her. It was pure theater for the next half hour in the hotel lobby. Chloe paced back and forth, attempting to come up with a plan for dealing with this sudden financial crisis. She would look at me frantically every few minutes, obviously hoping I would give in and offer to pay. But I remained seated on the comfortable couch in the lobby, appearing composed while inwardly relishing every moment of her predicament. I knew that if she had just apologized for her actions during the trip, I could have ended her agony with a swipe of my card. However, Chloe's pride prevented her from doing so. Rather, as though she still felt entitled to my money after a week of treating me like an unwanted invader, she expected me to offer help. She finally made the call she had been putting off. As she described the circumstances, I could hear her husband's anger rising over the phone. He was demanding to know how she could spend so carelessly, as the bill she had accrued was almost equal to his entire monthly salary. The money was finally transmitted to pay the account after what seemed like an eternity of difficult conversations and perhaps some desperate promises on her part. Chloe sat quietly in the taxi on the way to the airport, perhaps still contemplating her husband's reaction upon her return home. Her problems were far from over, but she was unaware of this. When we got to the airport, which was already getting close to departure time, she discovered I hadn't completed her flight check-in. She was left standing in the regular line, fumbling with her bags and getting more and more agitated as she watched the minutes pass while I breezed through priority check-in. This was because I had discreetly booked business class upgrades for Sarah, her parents, and myself at the gate, a pleasant surprise to round off their trip comfortably. That was the final straw. Chloe was stuck with her original economy seat. The full story was conveyed by the expression on her face as she walked past our roomy business class seats. She remained silent, but her stiff posture and clenched jaw spoke volumes. We enjoyed first-class service up front while she sat in economy the entire flight. At last, Chloe's composure broke the instant we touched down. Tears were streaming down her face as she launched into her version of events, practically running to her parents at baggage claim. Her dramatic account claimed that I had purposefully denied her the flight upgrades, humiliated her in public, and abandoned her at the hotel. Conveniently, she omitted the part about her week-long effort to exclude me from every family activity. As she went on with her performance, her father, who was already exhausted from the trip, became visibly upset. She was too preoccupied with portraying herself as the victim of my alleged mistreatment to notice or care about his health, even at this critical moment. Throughout Chloe's performance, I remained composed and waited for the appropriate opportunity to present my side. When I did speak, I described how she had deliberately excluded me from every family activity during a trip that I had paid for. One by one, I detailed every family-only picture, every staged seating arrangement, and every purposefully private conversation. The reasoning was straightforward. Why should she expect me to pay for her expenses as family if she didn't consider me family enough to be included in the memories? Her performance abruptly stopped when her mother stepped in. Sarah's mother had had enough of her daughter's antics after a week. Firmly, "Chloe, enough," she said. "We don't want to get involved. We noticed you excluding him the entire time. We urged you to include him, but you had your own plans to sideline him. Now deal with it." Chloe reacted even more defensively, refusing to take responsibility. When she accused me of controlling the family with money, her true colors emerged. "You partnered with your husband to humiliate your sister, your own blood," she yelled, turning to face Sarah. "You'll see what this man is going to do to you. He's going to sleep with another woman right under your nose, and you won't be able to do anything. You're blinded by his money." Sarah responded angrily to the unfounded accusation, making the baggage claim area feel like a scene from a family drama. Without Sarah's father, the situation might have escalated further. He had sat in quiet observation the entire journey, watching everything but saying little. His straightforward remark, "Chloe, your brother-in-law has done more than enough for you. If you can't appreciate it, you'd better keep your mouth shut," put an end to Chloe's outburst. But the harm to family ties had already been done. There was a profound stillness in the airport terminal following my father-in-law's final remarks. With quiet firmness, he asked to leave right away, and I hurriedly assisted him to the car. Chloe stood there by herself as we drove off. Even though she was 70 miles from home, she was too proud to ask for a ride. I knew the taxi fare would be exorbitant since she had arrived with us and hadn't brought her own car to the airport. However, after a week of her purposeful exclusion, I had lost the will to care. It was a quiet journey back to my in-laws' house. When we got there, they both sincerely thanked us for the vacation. The extended embrace from my father-in-law conveyed more than words could possibly express. Everything felt validated by that hug. After we got home, Sarah and I resumed our regular routines and initially avoided talking about what had transpired. Sarah finally broke the silence a few days later. She disclosed that Chloe was dealing with severe financial repercussions. Her husband, furious over having to bail her out, was demanding full reimbursement. Chloe found it difficult to handle the payback on top of her usual credit card obligations, especially since he declined to save her pompous butt, as he apparently described it. Sarah supported what I had done, but subtly hinted that perhaps I had gone too far. However, even as she said it, She admitted that her sister had desperately needed this wake-up call. For years, Chloe had treated people with disdain and exploited their generosity. It felt like long overdue justice that she was now being held accountable for her actions. When Sarah asked, I was able to honestly respond that I didn't regret my choices. Chloe had chosen her own tuition through her actions, and often the most expensive lessons are also the most effective. I got a range of responses after posting my tale online. Some said that I was too severe and that I ought to have just paid the bill to maintain harmony. In order to finance everyone's lavish vacation, they essentially wanted me to be a doormat and silently accept being treated like an outsider. However, I refused to be used that way, since I'm aware of my value. I only wanted Chloe to treat me with basic respect and include me in family events. I never intended for her to grovel or become subservient. Her pride was more important to her than making amends. Yet, even after everything, I would have paid for her expenses if she had just admitted her mistake and apologized. In actuality, Chloe and I never had a close relationship. When she would visit Sarah, our interaction over the years was limited to courteous greetings at family events. We didn't have any meaningful conversations or a true connection. Nevertheless, because she was family, I readily agreed to pay for her trip when she asked to join the vacation. That kindness ought to have earned at least some fundamental respect, but instead, it seemed only to strengthen her resolve to exclude me. Chloe's husband was still furious that he had to drain his savings to pay for her exorbitant expenses. She had accrued a bill almost equivalent to his monthly wage. No working individual would be pleased to see their hard-earned money vanish because their spouse spent a week acting like royalty on someone else's perceived dime. However, rather than take ownership of her actions, Chloe did what she does best: fabricate a story in which she is the victim and I am the villain who purposefully humiliated her. Knowing that Thanksgiving might be one of the final holidays spent with my father-in-law due to his deteriorating health, my mother-in-law had been organizing an extra special celebration. During the planning stages, however, Chloe's husband's refusal to attend threw a wrench in the preparations. Why? He couldn't tolerate being seated at the same table as someone, me, supposedly, who would make fun of someone who wasn't as wealthy. At that point, my mother-in-law finally had enough. She sat him down and told him everything about Chloe's actions on the trip to Miami. She said to him, "Check out the pictures from the vacation. Really look at them." Chloe's own social media post showed photo after photo of me being purposefully left out, shoved behind the camera, or forced to sit apart. It was impossible to ignore the visible evidence of my systematic exclusion. My mother-in-law described how she and my father-in-law had made several attempts to involve me, but Chloe had always found new ways to keep me out of the picture. This was particularly painful because I had always respected Chloe's husband. Although we weren't close friends, we always had cordial and courteous interactions on Thanksgiving and other holidays. I had never denigrated him because of his financial circumstances. I had never even entertained such thoughts. We were just two men who had married into the same family, doing our best to provide for our wives and help out where we could. The way she had manipulated him into viewing me as some classist villain showed the lengths Chloe would go to avoid accepting responsibility for her actions. After everything that had transpired, I was hesitant to attend Thanksgiving dinner, but I went out of respect for my father-in-law. A convenient explanation involving visiting his parents was used to justify Chloe and her husband's absence. The true story, which was far more unsettling than I had anticipated, didn't surface until after my father-in-law had gone to bed. It seemed the Miami incident had sparked a significant argument in Chloe's marriage. Instead of gaining humility from the experience, she had apparently used her embarrassment as fuel to continuously disparage her husband based on his income. Even though she only worked 20 hours a week as a part-time employee, she started pressing him to take on a second job on top of his full-time one. He accepted, with the reasonable requirement that he take a step back from some childcare and domestic chores in exchange for seeking more work. This concession infuriated Chloe. According to my mother-in-law, Chloe's husband had sobbed while telling her everything. It was astounding how much was expected of him while Chloe maintained a relaxed schedule. Chloe apparently expected him to work well over 40 hours a week and still handle his full share of household duties. It seemed the entitled attitude so noticeable during our trip to Miami was only the tip of the iceberg. After spending a week accruing debt she couldn't pay, the woman was now criticizing her diligent husband for not providing her with a more opulent lifestyle. Chloe's mother, my mother-in-law, had done everything she could to help her daughter see reason. She tried to convince Chloe that her demands were unrealistic, supported her son-in-law, and offered advice to her daughter. However, it appeared that Chloe had become dangerously captivated by the taste of luxury during our trip to Miami. Once claiming to be happy with modest family holidays, the woman was suddenly consumed with leading a life she hadn't earned. The situation got so bad that my mother-in-law finally had to issue a firm ultimatum. She bluntly advised Chloe that she shouldn't count on family support if her actions resulted in a divorce. More significantly, she was cautioned not to discuss marital issues with her father because the stress of seeing his daughter's marriage potentially fall apart due to her newfound materialism was too much for his fragile health. On the way home from Thanksgiving dinner, Sarah and I reflected on how our well-meaning invitation had gone so awry. I recalled a saying, perhaps something I'd seen displayed somewhere. Once you experience the luxury of a private island, you'll never set foot on a public one. There seemed no turning back once you tasted luxury. Perhaps this also applied to someone who had glimpsed business class after years of economy. Her husband was now suffering because we had unintentionally allowed Chloe to see a way of life she couldn't support. I felt bad about the whole situation, not because I forced her to pay her own expenses, but because I had inadvertently exposed her to a lifestyle that seemed to have so thoroughly distorted her perspective. She had momentarily tasted luxury, but now her husband, a kind man who worked hard to support his family, was being punished for not being able to sustain it. All I could do was hope she would regain her perspective before ruining her marriage in pursuit of a lifestyle she couldn't afford.